Hello everyone from along the Susquehanna River in Wilkes-Barre. I'm John Meyer along with Mindy Ramsey, and we did our whole morning show here this morning, and we thought, let's do a little bit more as long as we're here.
Absolutely. We know that people want to see these stories. There are so many personal stories, how people lived through Agnes, how they survived it, and also the fact that many of them only had minutes to get out.
Yeah, and so let's take a look at just some of the footage we dug through from the WNEP archives. It's just so powerful to see that what happened here 50 years ago today.
Get out now. Plymouth must be evacuated. You do have time. Don't panic. But please, leave now.
Everybody up. Everybody out.
50 years ago last night, the desperate efforts to get more than 100,000 people evacuated from the Wyoming Valley, fearing levees wouldn't hold after rains like no one had ever seen.
I just couldn't believe it was going to happen. I just couldn't believe that when they says we have to leave the house because of the water was going to, we were going to be flooded. I just didn't believe it.
The efforts to save the Wyoming Valley were frantic. Hundreds of volunteers helping to fill and stack sandbags, hoping to save their neighbors. Until the morning of the 23rd, 50 years ago this morning, the haunting siren and alert.
Get out now. Get out now. There's still time, but this is the warning that the river is starting to come over the dike.
Work on the dikes has ceased. The water is expected to break through.
The levees meant to protect Wilkes-Barre and the many communities surrounding it began to fail. The Susquehanna came rushing in.
All I saw was this wall of water about 2-3 feet high behind us, and I mean, I never ran so fast in all my life.
Unbelievable. South Wilkes-Barre completely inundated with water. You can't even see a road, a side road, an alley, a back street, or a backyard. The water is cresting at the first floor of many of the homes.
What followed were countless rescues, boats navigating city streets, fires burned with no way to put them out. And when the water receded, a muddy mess, a valley devastated.
Our wedding pictures, they're all gone. That's sentimental value items, they're never replaceable. I think that kind of hit hard.
The Wyoming Valley story, just one of many. The storm called Agnes leaving a mark on much of Pennsylvania that still felt 5 decades later. I have to say, seeing that video, it gives me chills just to think of what played out right here 50 years ago.
And the siren was just haunting, hearing that and hearing the gnat sound of them saying, get out now. Those images are amazing.
They really are. And you know, when you think about Agnes and you hear in the Wyoming Valley, if you stop pretty much anyone around here, they're gonna have their own Agnes story or someone in their family's Agnes story.
And amazingly, a lot of folks at Newswatch 16 have their own Agnes story as well. In fact, Chelsea Strube, one of our reporters and anchors, her family was directly affected.
Yeah, her mom lived in South Wilkes-Barre, and Chelsea talked to her mom about it.
To get a better understanding of what cleanup after Agnes was like, I asked my mother, Joan, whose family had several properties in South Wilkes-Barre at the time, to come with me on a walk and talk me through it.
There was like over 11 feet of water in our house. You can see where the flood line is there. All the floors, downstairs and upstairs, had to be all replaced.
My mother says as a 14-year-old girl, she felt like it was never going to stop raining.
So, I mean, you think about it, the water, you can't even reach as tall as the water was right now.
Oh, no. It would be twice that high. It was upstairs.
And the aftermath following the flood sticks with her the most.
The smell and the mud. It really was unbelievable. I don't think unless you lived through it or saw it that you would ever know what it was like.
Chelsea Strube, Newswatch 16, Wilkes-Barre.
Well, we've been watching Mike Stevens tell stories and meet interesting people for 35 years on the Pennsylvania Road, but he was also there during Agnes.
Yeah, he was. And Mike Stevens was from Sawyersville, so part of the area that was flooded. He was just starting his career in radio back then, and Ali Gallo talked to him about what it was like to be part of that whole Agnes experience.
In June of 1972, Mike Stevens was in his 20s, working in the radio industry. He remembers the day the radio station evacuated from its Wilkes-Barre location and set up shop in Scranton.
We started doing public service things like evacuation here, and you can get food over here, and they have the helicopter landing pad over there. So we were able to do that as a public service for the community. And that was the beginning of the Agnes flood story.
Just the beginning of what Mike would later realize was one of the biggest stories of his career.
After your day's work is done, you don't comprehend the whole picture. You know very well the small part of it, where you were, but the rest of it, no, you don't really know. So to conceive that this flood was going to be as big as it was is almost impossible.
For months and months after the flood, Mike traveled the area for work, meeting people and telling their stories. He says he will never forget all of the tears shed in his interviews.
All the things that they loved, all the pictures, all the mementos of life, gone.
As the months went on, Mike says he remembers when the weather started turning colder and the new problems that created for people who still had no place to live.
Agnes put fear into people, real fear, and it put real sorrow into people and heartache.
And Mike was able to give those people an outlet through his storytelling. Hear more from Mike Stevens tonight during our special, Agnes 50 Years Later, at 7:30 on WNEP2. Allie Gallo, Newswatch 16.
Mike just has so many stories about when Agnes happened, and he talks about the people, everything that they lost, the grief they felt, and how that lasted for a long time.
And isn't it something to hear Mike Stevens talk about anything, let alone something so historic?
He tells a good story.
He's like the voice of northeastern Pennsylvania, so it's fitting for him to talk about Agnes, of course. And you know, Mike was from Swarsville, and my mother-in-law, her family was from Swarsville. And so as we look back on 50 years, she got out this album.
This is amazing. What a treasure.
And to look through, you know, just in the beginning here, I'll just show you this. This is my Rennie's grandmother's.
Right.
Put this album together. Our home, Hurricane Agnes, William and Irene Pahalski. And it's just so many photos that go through like the devastation that they went through. And we got a lot of photos from people at home too.
Yeah, we put out the call and people were just sending in so many photos and their personal stories of how they survived Agnes.
A lot of people are likely going through old albums this week, memories of the Agnes flood rushing back. My mother-in-law's photos show the Pahalski family home in Swarsville wrecked by the high waters. Two photos of her stand out to me, one leaning against the wall while cleaning, another sitting frustrated on the front porch, telling much of the story.
Some of you also sharing photos of the devastation you lived through, much of it in the Wyoming Valley. Mary Beth Syracuse also sending images of the mess in Swarsville. Her mom wrote on this photo 19 years of marriage piled on the curb. How about the amount of mud taken from their basement?
Pam Priest-Thomas lived through it all in Kingston. Her home on South Wells Avenue had water on the second floor.
Susan Matucci says her parents had just paid off the mortgage here in South Wilkes-Barre and just remodeled the kitchen, all of it lost.
How about this photo from Debbie Snyder? She says her uncle took them by the levee in 44 to see the high river. The dike broke right here, hours later.
Joseph Krasnahill says this is what he was doing, sandbagging to help save the valley. He turned 17 the week before.
Kim Toby says her dad, Nicholas Gushka, was the state trooper in this boat in Kingston, helping rescue others. She says he was always proud he helped serve his community during that time.
And we know the devastation went far beyond the Wyoming Valley. Bev James showing us her flooded home on Tioga Street in Tunkhannock.
From Bradford County, Alice K. Weingartner sharing her family's business, Schaefer's Feed Service in Monroeton. She remembers being 16 shoveling mud, but also remembers all the help her dad received getting it back up and running.
On Facebook, we also got many stories from back then. Linda Bartlett says, sorry, the only pictures are etched in her memory. Being a child, the fear, the loss of everything, including her dog, and a neighbor who woke her family of 5 to get them out.
Diane Morio says they only lived in their house 2 weeks with a sister on each side on the Sansui Parkway. The house was covered. They lost everything.
And from Barbara Staniszewski, don't want to remember those days, with the prayers emoji.
It really is just amazing to see all those viewers' photos, you know, that they captured it because it's where they lived. And, you know, looking through this album and listening to my mother-in-law, she just told us the stories about they moved back into their house 3 weeks after the flood, a house that had no windows, gutted, because her mom said, we're not staying at a relative's anymore, we're going home.
No running water.
No running water, no electricity. They slept there in the dark with no windows and everything like that. You just think of that, and hearing those firsthand stories is just so incredible. And really, as a Pennsylvania boy, Agnes is such a part of the state's history. Even I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. My mom and dad always told the story about moving from Pittsburgh on those days in Agnes back then, and crossing one of the bridges over the Allegheny River out there, and the river lapping at the bottom of the bridge. And they were moving back to my hometown, and they closed the bridge right after that. The moving company couldn't come because they were flooded, and so they couldn't get their stuff. They went home, and our family has a cabin on a lake, and the boat was up in the woods because the lake had come up like 40-some feet.
Up in the trees.
In the trees. My dad had to swim out and get it out of the trees. And it, you know, everyone just has those Agnes stories, and it's been special to hear those this week.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to relive what happened 50 years later through all the stories that people have shared with us.
And we're sitting here today, and it's 50 years ago since the river crested, and we have the Market Street Bridge. It's just weird to think of the river lapping against the bottom of that. All that water.
Hard to imagine water being that high. Where we are now would have been underwater.
But most importantly, as we're here this morning and as we're here observing this anniversary, is look now. This is a beautiful river common to celebrate the river. The Wyoming Valley bounced back, and it was really cool to be part of this morning and be here.
Absolutely. We have to remember, it's a valley with a heart.
It is. So thanks for having an interest in Agnes, because I think it's pretty important we all remember what played out here 50 years ago. See you later, everybody.
Bye-bye.